Good morning, Kenya. Rise and shine to the morning momentum. Your daily dose of a comprehensive rundown of the top stories making the headlines, today being 3rd day of March. It's a Monday, a new week has dawned, and we are here to give you a comprehensive rundown of the top stories making the headlines on the papers this morning. This is a daily compendium of local and international news, human interest stories, current affairs, and expert opinion. The hashtag is the morning momentum at Younib Media TV at Alfonsoh Albakwekwe. My name is Alfonsoh Ouma. Let's start with the Standard this morning on the front page. Co-President Raila, that's the big question. Now, a political realignment is taking shape as ODM leader Raila Odinga nears a deal with President William Ruto. The agreement modeled after past power-sharing pacts could see Raila assume an executive prime minister role. Sources say plans are underway to prepare Harambee House, traditionally the seat of the presidency, for him. That story is beefed up for you on page 4 of the Standard this morning. On page 6, Kivitu family in bitter feud over how to share wealth. We'll take a look at that in a short while. On page 2, charity or playing politics, fundraisers make a comeback. Now, despite a state ban on public fundraisers, President Ruto and senior officials are back to making hefty church donations. President Ruto pledged 20 million shillings to a Nairobi church yesterday, vowing to quote-unquote give to God despite criticism. The revival of fundraisers raised fresh concerns over transparency, accountability, and political influence in philanthropy. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 19 this morning, 42 billion shillings road cash to pay contractors. We'll take a look at that. On the international news this morning, Ugandan army deploys to North DRC. That story is beefed up for you on page 23. And on sports news this morning, what it will take for McCarthy to succeed. We'll also take a brief look at that. Let's take a look at page 2 of the Standard this morning. Fundraisers come back with a bang as Ruto pledges 100 million shillings to church. Now, last July, the president banned state officers from participating in public fundraisers. He also ordered the Attorney General to prepare and submit legislation to this effect. You want to catch up with more of those insights on page 2. This comes just a day after he pledged to give 20 million shillings to Jesus Winner Ministry in Nairobi yesterday. Now, on page 3 of the Standard this morning, Todonyang reels from bloodletting horror. Now, the February 22 attack left nearly 50 people missing, many of them feared dead. It is believed that the attackers were from the Dasanek community of Ethiopia. You want to catch up with that on page 2. Let's take a look at page 4 now. Why Raila could be headed for prime minister position in new deal with Ruto. Now, NADCO report could be rushed through parliament to create the office of prime minister. ODM leader is said to be pushing for more cabinet and principal secretary slots. That story is on page 4. On page 5 of the Standard this morning, it's all about empowering menstrual health in Kenya, quality, safety, and sustainability at the forefront. You'll catch up with that story on page 5. Now, on page 6 this morning, Kivitu's family in bitter feud over prime property. Now, at the heart of the 7-year dispute is a property in Nairobi's Garden Estate, causing deep rifts within the family. Kivitu's estate largely comprises of 13 real estate properties, including residential, agricultural, and commercial land. That story is beefed up for you on page 6. At a glance now, a garden estate property in Nairobi is the primary point of contention among family members. Kivitu's second wife, Priscilla Ndululu, and his children from both marriages are disputing the wealth. Also, some family members are claiming equal share of the property and others are defending their rights. And Ndululu asserts that the garden estate land is matrimonial property and should belong to her. That story is on page 6. Let's take a look at page 7. High Court hands farm, High Court hands farm a lifeline in 1.6 billion shillings a row. Now, Procter & Allen is one of the oldest food processors, which was founded in 19 46. Now, the firm is locked in a debt dispute with KCB, which has appointed receiver managers. The amount in the figure stands at $10 million, which is the amount that Procter & Allen lawyers say a strategic investor had agreed to inject in the company. The firm says it had secured another 800 million shillings from a separate investor. That story is beefed up for you on page 7 of the Standard this morning. On page 8, Chebukati, his elections legacy through the eyes of Kivitu. Now, Kivitu lived a desolate life after 2007 debacle that led to post-election bloodshed. Now, while Ruto lauded Chebukati, reactions after his death showed many had not forgiven him. Let's delve a little bit into that. Now, I saw him in post. He had stopped to look for something in the men's grooming section. His hands were shaking. He looked frail. I pushed my trolley towards him and quote unquote, "Good afternoon, sir. What can I help you pick?" He turned slowly and looked at me. The man had aged by almost 20 years since I last saw him. When he finally recognized me, his wrinkled face broke into a weak smile and he pointed towards the shaving cream. I picked it for him. We walked slowly as I helped him fill up his shopping basket. His gait was slow, hesitant, and painful. I silently turned from a shopper to a bodyguard, and I helped the elderly man with clearing of payment at the till. We then walked to his car. That was the last time I saw Samuel Kivitu, the former chairman of IEBC. This is a story of Caleb Atemi. Now, you'll catch up with more of those insights, why his legacy elections and the eyes of Kivitu being compared on page 8. On page 9 of the Standard this morning, Gachagua to Ruto, get used to our criticism. Now, Gachagua challenged President Ruto to stop listening to opposition criticism and focus on delivering his promises. He acknowledged the importance of the Kamba vote, emphasizing unity to unseat Ruto in 2027. Yeah, now that story of Gachagua is augmented for you on page 9. Let's take a look at page 10. CBK survey reveals what top CEOs want Ruto to do to save the economy. Now, chief executives want government to stop excessive borrowing and stabilize the tax regime. Businesses say a friendly environment would stop more companies from collapse. Now, this is the thing. Hard times for 9,441 companies. And this is the number of registered companies that have shut down over the past 5 years due to economic hardships. 9,441. On page 11 of the Standard this morning, Church and Family ask politicians not to bring goons to MP's burial. Catholic Church and widow say late Malava MP Malulu Injendi was humble and peaceful. Commissioner warns political class to respect President Ruto at burial tomorrow. That story will be beefed up for you on page 11 if you grab your copy of the Standard this morning. Let's shift gears and take a look at the expert opinion on page 13. Do you support Catholic bishops' fresh criticism? Now, Dr. Apostle Boniface Chule says yes, it's a great commission church. That, on the contrary, Brown Ongera, businessman in Kisii, says no. Criticism is unjustified in a bad taste. Right, let's move on and take a look at other stories on the Standard this morning. We take a look at county news. Now, lobby. Proposed cybercrime law will endanger freedom of speech. Now, residents lobby says act targets individuals seen as state critics or political opponents. Wajir East MP Aden Mohammed proposes bill to ban online terror, extremist content. In Nakuru County, Jumua's KRB appointment challenged. A Nakuru resident has gone to court to challenge Aisha Jumua's appointment as the chairperson of Kenya Roads Board, terming it unconstitutional and illegal. Jumua's appointment by Roads and Transport CS Davis Chirchir on January 16th was confirmed by President William Ruto on January 17th in a Gazette notice. In Naivasha County, we have enough ARVs and condoms, says an official. The National Syndemic Disease Control Council has said there is an adequate stock of condoms, ARVs, and TB drugs despite the budget freeze by the U.S. government. Now we move to another story here. Dongo Kundu in Naivasha, an economic zone that has gotten now 128 billion shillings boost in deal. The multi-billion deal aims to foster industrial growth, create jobs, and position Kenya as a regional trade powerhouse. The deal allocates 30 billion shillings for Dongo Kundu, a project that has been mired in delays for decades. You want to catch up with that story on page 18. Now we take a quick look at business news on the Standard this morning. Treasury to use 42 billion shillings from Road Kitty to pay contractors. Now delayed payment has resulted in stalled road projects and abandoned sites that have put pedestrians and motorists in great danger. The majority of the money, which is estimated to be over 650 billion shillings, is owed to small-sized businesses. You want to catch up with that on page 19. Now, in matters regulation, Kagwe opposes merger of KEFI's Biosafety Agency. Agricultural Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe now says the National Biosafety Authority (NBA) cannot be merged with Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Services as initially proposed. Mr. Kagwe explained that the two entities have distinct international obligations to fulfill that the country signed with other global peers. That story is beefed up for you on page 19. Now, on the Planet Action this morning, Tana residents are waiting for an unwanted guest from the skies. Residents along Tana River fearful of what this year's long rain could portend. Experts, including KMD, warn that the rainfall could be several times heavier. That story is beefed up for you on page 21. Let's take a look at world news. Egypt rejects attempts to form parallel Sudanese government. Sudan has been locked in a war between the army and the paramilitary RSF for nearly 2 years. Saudi Arabia, which previously mediated ceasefire talks between the warring sides, also rejected the RSF's move. That story is beefed up for you on page 23. In London, UK and France working with Ukraine on plan to end fighting. Britain and France are working with Ukraine on plans to end the fighting with Russia. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Sunday as European leaders gathered for crisis talks after a blowout between Kyiv and Washington. That story is beefed up for you on page 23. Let's move on and take a look at the sporting action on the Standard this morning. We start with golf. Now, Mutahi leads, others follow. Jacqueline over the moon after clinching top title at Sea Link course. Golf braves strong winds from Indian Ocean to floor veterans. That story is beefed up for you on page 29. Let's move on and take a look at page 30. Is McCarthy the man who will lead Kenyans into the promised land? Now, South African McCarthy joins Harambee Stars from Manchester United. His first assignment will be the 2026 World Cup qualifiers set for 17th of March. Now, that is when Kenya will play Gambia in a 2026 World Cup qualifier. In 2019 is the last time Kenya played the African Cup of Nations, and 31 international goals Benny McCarthy has scored for South Africa. Now, let's take a look at page 31. It's still about that story of whether McCarthy is the one who will lead Kenya to the promised land, and it's all about the 2026 World Cup qualifiers. Now, also still on sports news on the cover page of the Standard this morning, Equity Bank leave champs Kenya prisons stand. Now, the Warders, who successfully defended their title last season, have now lost 2 matches. Prisons Nairobi, Trailblazers, KDF, and KFS also triumphed in their league matches. Now, with that story of Equity Bank, we come to the end of reviewing the Standard this morning. We take a quick break and then we come back with the top stories on the Daily Nation. Don't go away. The best is yet to come. See you on the other side of this broadcast. Welcome back to the Morning Momentum. If you're just joining us, you are rolling with the host with the most. Alfonsoh, Ouma is my name. Let's take a look at the top stories on the Daily Nation this morning. The elephant in the room. Red flags in Ruto'S housing project. Now, only 1 in 559 adults are saving at Bomayangu platform to own the affordable houses. Now, the government has enrolled into 49.5 billion shillings affordable housing contracts on parcels of land with missing title deeds. This raises questions on how Kenyans buying houses from the projects will get sectional titles to own the units in absence of original titles at a time when the affordable housing program continues to operate in an opaque regulatory environment. Are beneficiaries risking their hard-earned cash? That story is beefed up for you on page 4 and page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 3, it's a big win for employees on pay after layoffs. Now, in a president's setting judgment that advances the rights of workers and trade unions, an appellate bench comprising Justices Pauline Nyamweya, Lydia Achode, and Weldon Korir have upheld the finding of the Employment and Labor Relations Court that former Barclays Bank, now Absa Bank, employees would benefit from a collective bargaining agreement signed after they exited the service, but covering the period when they were still in employment. On page 2, Untouchables, probe into jobs scam goes cold. Thousands of vulnerable job seekers cumulatively lost over 2.5 billion shillings to suspect job recruitment agencies that promised them better lives abroad but left them in misery. In a puzzling twist, the detectives investigating the rogue companies were transferred to remote areas, with the culprits still roaming free and luring other unsuspecting victims. Who is protecting these untouchables? That story is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 7, like Uhuru, Ruto'S reign now at the mercy of Raila. And lastly, on page 10, betrayal and bloodshed, cover-up of JM Kariuki's assassination. Let's delve into the Daily Nation on page 2. Untouchables, victims in tears as jobs scam probes collapse. Lead investigator in the cases and his team transferred, reports forwarded to DPP's office. Now, job seeker afraid to return to the village because she cannot account for 240,000 shillings raised for her trip abroad. Now, at a glance, jobs advertised on media platforms. In all the fraud cases, the script was always the same. The recruitment agencies scammed job seekers by advertising in the mainstream media and social media jobs in Europe, South Africa, and the United Arab Emirates and the US. One was required to pay between 100,000 shillings and 350,000 shillings for facilitation to secure the caregiver and hotelier jobs, but the job seekers would be issued with a visa facilitation contract. The second strategy was intentional, poor documentation, and cooked financial statements during visa application on behalf of job seekers. This saw the applications denied by embassies and high commissions, with some of the applicants slapped with 5-year visa bans. That story is briefed up for you on page 2. On page 3 this morning, big win for bank employees on pay after layoffs. 3 appellate judges uphold trial court's judgment that the staff exited work under a new CBA. Effective date of the deal between the Insurance and Finance Union and Kenya Bankers Association was backdated. Here is what they said. Matter was handled by the Employment and Labor Relations Court, then proceeded to Appeal Court. The Employment and Labor Relations Court said the former employees would benefit from a CBA signed after they exited service, but covered the period when they were still in service. Now, the Appeal Court said a just interpretation of the contract between the parties would lead to the logical conclusion that the CBA became part of the contract of service between the bank and the former employees. The court added that even if parties to a voluntary exit scheme are bound by the terms of the agreement, nothing stops an employee who has exited from benefiting from a backdated CBA. Now, on page 4 and page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning, red flags in Ruto'S affordable housing projects amid public distrust. Now, CS Wahome said the housing levy will not enable Kenyans to get a house. Meanwhile, the government has entered into a 49.5 billion shillings contracts for houses built on land without title deeds, adding to growing confusion. Auditor says questions abound as to whether Kenyans buying the houses will get land ownership documents for their units in the absence of original titles from which their sectional titles will be derived. It still remains a puzzle very hard to solve because people are still paying for the housing levy, but the CS said the housing levy will not land you an affordable house. Now, you want to catch up with more of those red flags beefed up for you on page 4 and page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 6. How Raila seized control of Senate committees in deal. Rigathi allies are the biggest losers, having boycotted the elections and refused to quote-unquote legitimize an illegality. Now, Kenya Kwanza Alliance ceded the leadership of 5 key House committees to ODM in line with their newfound camaraderie. New leadership, ODM wrests control of seats from Gachagua allies. 20 is the total number of committees in the Senate. On page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning, like Uhuru, Ruto'S reign now at the mercy of ODM leader. Kenyatta sought Raila's support to reinforce the stability of his administration, and so is the incumbent. Unlike the former president who sidelined his deputy in his second term, the incumbent plotted Rigathi ouster in his first term. That story is beefed up for you on page 7. Let's move on and take a look at page 8. Alliance High pushes 200 million shillings project to mark 100 years. Former current students and schools administrators hold special prayers. Principal Chomba emphasizes significance of the initiative, describing it as a major milestone in the school's history, and that story is beefed up for you on page 8. Let's move on swiftly and take a look at page 10. Betrayal and bloodshed, the state's cover-up of J.M. Kariuki's assassination. There was an elaborate deception suggesting J.M. was alive and well in Zambia. lodged at the Intercontinental. While Gethi kept a watchful eye on his every step, CID Chief Nderi waved a tale to implicate him in the 1975 Nairobi bomb blast. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. Takes you back to history. Now, let's take a look at the expert opinion on the Daily Nation this morning. Watch out lest tribalism kills the Kenyan dream. Now, Parliament is spineless and only able to stand up when fighting for higher salaries and allowances. That is what the expert opinion says on page 14 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 15, NCIC woos point to trouble for commissions. Commissions not captured through the appointment of pliant commissioners are starved of resources. That story is beefed up for you on page 15. Let's move on and take a look at page 16 now. The letter of the day: growing corruption in counties is worrying. For a long time, corruption has been a major problem in Kenya, but it is deeply concerning that county government in situations meant to foster development and service delivery are now at the forefront of enabling it. That story is on page 16 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's move on and take a look at county news. 8 counties hired thousands of staff without interviews, says the Auditor General. Now, workers were added to payrolls without their positions being advertised, and devolved units are Samburu, Trans Nzoia, Nairobi, Narok, Nandi, Embu, Uasin Gishu, and Machakos counties. Now, 8 county governments hired thousands of staff without following due process during the 2023-2024 financial year, a report by the Auditor General has revealed. The workers were recruited and added to payrolls without their positions being advertised, and neither were candidates shortlisted nor interviews conducted. The shocking details in the latest report released last week indicate that the recruited staff in Samburu, Trans Nzoia, Nairobi, Narok, Nandi, Embu, and Machakos continue drawing salaries and allowances running into millions of shillings every month. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. In Kilifi County, court blocks demolition of 185 million shillings beach bar. That story is on page 20 for you. On the DN2 article this morning, it's about drug abuse on campus. NACADA report paints a picture of more students, especially females, being lured into taking narcotics. Now, let's move on and take a look at more county news here. How free feeding plan is keeping children in Kiambu ECDE centers. Officials say there has been a significant increase of learners in the centers, and that according to data from the county's Department Education in Kiambu, it says that 524 ECD centers have a total of 39,600 learners. That story is beefed up for you on page 21. Let's move on and take a look at now the international scene. Israel blocks aid into Gaza as a ceasefire standoff escalates. If agreed, troops would hold fighting until the end of the Ramadan and the Jewish Passover holiday. Hamas has denounced Israel's move as blackmail and a blatant coup against the agreement. That story is beefed up for you on page 22. Also on the international scene this morning, UK's stammerer tries to restore hope for Ukraine peace at a summit. Now, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will try to revive hope for peace in Ukraine at a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky and other Western leaders on Sunday, 2 days after the Ukrainian president clashed with US President Donald Trump. Now, in the world of business on the Daily Nation this morning, manufacturers, agriculture farms hit by currency lows, exporters stare at lower returns on stronger shilling on foreign earnings. It's a painful loss as cabbage farmer in Molo lacks market. 829 million shillings is the finance cost for BAT in the year to December 2024. All right. In the maritime sector, Maersk and KPA in training deal. AP Mola, Maersk, a global integrated logistics company, has partnered with the Kenya Ports Authority to launch a maritime training program to provide Kenya's next generation of shipping professionals with essential hands-on experience at the sea. In matters motoring, M-Copper deal drives Bolt's EV bikes sales. Now, a deal between Bolt and M-Copper inked in April last year has helped drive sale of up to 500 electric bikes, the e-taxi firm has reported. This, Bolt says, represents approximately 50% of its operational electric bikes countrywide. That story is briefed up for you on page 23. On matters insurance, Kenya Re to re-enter Tanzania-India markets by June. Now, Kenya Insurance Corporation plans to set up a subsidiary in Tanzania and a branch in India within the next 4 months as it embarks on an expansion strategy to win more businesses in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Hilary Wachera, managing director at Kenya Re, said in an interview that the entry into Tanzania will help them win back deals if it lost following introduction of regulations that barred reinsurers without local presence from underwriting any business in that market. Last story is briefed up for you on page 23. Let's move on and take a look at sports news now on the Daily Nation this morning. Now, we start with volleyball. Equity on cloud 9 after beating Prisons. Bankers see off defending champions in 3 sets. Prisons opposite hitter Michael Chemos blames loss on disorganization. Now, in matters golfing, Libons see off old Cambrians. Lenana School All students, popularly known as the Libons, clinched a narrow 2-point victory over their arch rivals, the Old Cambrians. That is the Nairobi School All students. In the first round of this year's Schools Derby Golf Tournament, the thrilling event held on Friday at Karen Country Club attracted 176 golfers, with Libons securing 648 points against the Old Cambrians. 646. Now, on page 39 this morning, PSG shift focus to Liverpool test. Endrick wants his charges to play in their strengths against Europe's most informed team. Now, French champions host the first leg on Wednesday, with the second leg on March 11th. On page 39 this morning, also, Absa Bank Kenya seeks more sports partnership. Now, Absa Bank Kenya has commented its status as the biggest sponsor of the prestigious Magical Kenya Open at the Muthaiga Golf Club with 60 million shillings in funding for this year's event. It marks the 14th year the bank has sponsored the DP World Tournament. Absa Bank Kenya CEO and Managing Director Abdi Mohammed discussed the bank's involvement in sports and beyond. That story is briefed up for you on page 39. On the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning, Kenya's Moseti dedicates podium finish to spouse. Tokyo Marathon is what we are talking about. She finished second in personal best time of 2 hours, 16 minutes and 56 seconds. The mother of one dreams of representing the country at World Championships in September. Let's take a look at FKF Premier League. Opinion divided as Mark Cup is set to take over as Stars coach. Now, Kakamega Homeboys coach Francis Baraza has faulted the Football Kenya Federation for settling on South African legend Benny McCarthy as the new Harambee Stars head coach. With that story of McCarthy, we come to the tail end of the morning momentum this third day of March 2025. Thank you so much for keeping us company and for choosing to watch the best youth television network in East and Central Africa, Younib TV. See you tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, do have a beautiful Tuesday. I have been your host, Alfonsoh. Ouma.